Welcome to the part of American history that they definitely did not teach you in school. There is big news out about Bitcoin legislation yet again. This is the Bitcoin for America Act, which is a very polite way of saying that Washington has finally woken up and realized it needs to touch grass and hold some actual hard money. So here is what is going on. For the first time ever, a sitting member of Congress woke up and said, what if Americans could pay their federal taxes in Bitcoin instead of this decaying carnival coupon that we call the US dollar? And instead of getting escorted out of the building, he actually got to file the bill. So now we have a proposal where you get to work all year, you send the IRS your Bitcoin, and instead of them dumping it on the market for scraps of fiat, it goes into a strategic Bitcoin reserve. The United States government, the same crew that spent decades worshipping treasury bonds, is now flirting with the idea of officially stacking sats. Now, we know that there was a strategic Bitcoin reserve order from President Trump, but this would be it codifying it into law. Think about what this means for the old system. The old fiat machine runs on the assumption that you will hold the bag forever while they inflate it, they tax it, and then they lecture you about stability. But this bill quietly says, yeah, that's not really working anymore. It admits that people trust a fixed supply asset more than some committee at the Federal Reserve. They are even talking about exempting capital gains on the Bitcoin that you use to pay taxes. So translation, the government is so desperate to plug itself into the Bitcoin network that it is willing to give up a slice of its favorite addiction, which is taxing every move that you make. So I'm going to walk through how this bill works, what the strategic Bitcoin reserve actually is according to this bill, and how this collides with the existing debt pyramid, and why every Bitcoin treasury company is now getting the greatest free marketing campaign of all time from Congress itself. If you think that this is bullish now, wait till you see what happens when the IRS becomes an involuntary Bitcoin accumulation desk for the United States government. So this is where the things get funnier, because Washington actually wrote this down on paper with a straight face. First box is the tax payment integration. This bill lets you pay your federal taxes in Bitcoin, and the IRS, which can barely process a W-2 without having a panic attack, is now supposed to accept sats like it's running a lightning node at a Bitcoin meetup. And the wild part is that they are eliminating capital gains taxes on the Bitcoin that you use to pay your taxes. So for the first time in history, a government is basically saying, yeah, we messed up so badly that we are willing to lose tax revenue if it means that we get our hands on some Bitcoin. And the next box right here is the strategic reserve. Any Bitcoin that you send to pay taxes does not get dumped ever. It does not get sold to finance whatever 600-page spending bill that they forget to read. It goes straight into the federal Bitcoin reserve. The United States government is literally just building a stack like a degenerate who just discovered cold storage. We are talking about a future where the IRS accidentally becomes one of the top Bitcoin holders on earth simply because people paid their taxes. And then we have to look at the operational framework, because this is the comedy section. Congress is now telling the IRS and the Treasury to create an operational framework to treat Bitcoin as remitted payment. That means that they have to figure out custody, audits, security, and transparency. This is the same government that loses USB drives in parking lots, and now they are preparing to hold an asset that cannot be reversed, refunded, or explained away in any White House press conference. So what does all of this mean? Well, it means the United States is quietly preparing to operate inside of the Bitcoin economy, whether it understands it or not. It means that the bill is not symbolic anymore. It is logistical. And once you force the Internal Revenue Service to interact with Bitcoin at scale, the entire financial system starts shifting under their feet. This is not a baby step, kids. This is dragging the federal government into the digital asset era, whether it screams or not. So right now, the Bitcoin reserve is Washington's way of saying, look, we know we printed too much money. We know the bonds market is held together with chewing gum, and we need something real before the whole thing catches fire. So here's the deal. Every Bitcoin people send to pay taxes does not get sold off for dollars. It goes straight into a sovereign Bitcoin reserve that the government is keeping for long-term resilience. This is the same government that once told everyone that Bitcoin was a toy for criminals, and now it is building a national stash. And this matters because it creates a direct link between federal tax intake in federal Bitcoin accumulation. The government is now not just tolerating Bitcoin, it is accumulating Bitcoin, it is going to be holding Bitcoin, it protects Bitcoin, and it's going to do it permanently. That means the United States is the first nation to formally integrate Bitcoin into federal fiscal operations. It's not just an executive order. If this passes, it is codified into law. Yes, the United States, a country that cannot agree on literally anything, looks like they might agree to possibly become a Bitcoin holder of last resort. This is a level of irony that no comedian could ever write. El Salvador, if you remember, they did this as a bold move, and America is doing it as they are finally realizing that the dollar is not aging like fine wine. And once the United States opens this door, every other country on earth starts to sweat, because if the US Treasury is stacking Bitcoin through tax receipts, it means that every government on planet Earth now has to consider whether they want to be early or whether they want to be the pathetic nation that bought Bitcoin at the highest possible price. This slide is not just policy, it is geopolitical pressure forming in real time, and you are watching it happen before the politicians even know what they unleashed. Now, I'm just saying tax-free capital gains on your Bitcoin in order to alleviate taxes, well, that could mean a Bitcoin supply shock from the United States government acquiring Bitcoin, because the first point, there's going to be a reduced market float. If the United States starts absorbing Bitcoin through tax payments, well, that means that the float just shrinks, the same float that already looks like a starvation diet. If Washington becomes a competitor in the open market, it does not like to lose. So now you have sovereign demand crowding out everyone from the retail traders who still happen to be in Bitcoin to pension funds to corporations, and this is how you create scarcity without even trying. And the next point, this gives instant institutional credibility to the asset. Every single CFO who used to laugh at Bitcoin during board meetings suddenly has to take it seriously because the federal government is holding it, and they're also incentivizing to acquire it. The moment that the United States Treasury keeps Bitcoin on the balance sheet, any institution pretending it is too risky looks like it's being run by people who still type with two fingers. And third, obviously, this adds geopolitical significance. And this is where the fun begins, because the second that the United States starts actually treating Bitcoin like a strategic asset, that means that every other country just has to respond, because if they ignore it, they fall behind. This is game theory 101. If they chase it, they drive the price higher. The entire international monetary system becomes a strange competitive game where nations race to acquire an asset with a fixed supply and no political off switch at all. And then you would have the market repricing, and this is the quiet part that nobody in DC wants to say out loud, but also because nobody in DC understands it yet. If the federal government integrates Bitcoin into fiscal operations, the market will reprice the entire long-term adoption curve, because probability changes, the scarcity changes, the supply changes, the demand changes. And the only asset on Earth with an absolute supply cap reacts violently every time those variables move even slightly. So this slide is very simple. The government, yes, it may be joining the party late, but when it shows up, it moves the furniture, it takes over the playlist, and everyone else in the world has to either adjust or get crushed in the long game. And this could mean that the Bitcoin treasury companies out there start to pop some champagne a little bit, because the rest of corporate America is still sweating through their dress shirts while the United States government is signing off on a Bitcoin treasury policy. Because you have the validation of the treasury model. The government adoption confirms exactly what strategy Sequan's metaplanet have been screaming into the void. Bitcoin is not a hobby. It is not a toy. It is a strategic asset, and the corporations woke up to it first. But the moment that the federal government starts holding Bitcoin as part of its fiscal machinery, every single analyst who ever called MSTR irresponsible instantly looks like they need remedial finance classes. A sovereign reserve would absolutely slap the old narrative in half. It proves that the Bitcoin treasury model was not reckless in the slightest. It proved that everybody who got to it was early. It proves that Saylor was not some crazy old man. In fact, he was a visionary genius. He was correct before everybody else even realized that the game had started, and when government legitimizes the asset, the institutions follow. That means higher inflows. That means higher MNAV multiples. That means that the liquidity constraints improve because now your entire sector sits under a government-approved spotlight. This bill would give a boost to every company using preferred equity and Bitcoin-based yield instruments. Suddenly, the idea of monetizing Bitcoin at scale doesn't seem exotic anymore. It seems aligned with federal policy decisions. And the best part, national competition creates competitive pressure. Corporations now have to position themselves with Bitcoin because the United States government is doing it. No CFO wants to be the one who missed the biggest asset shift of the century because they were too scared to buy something that already had a fixed supply and a decade of perfect uptime. This is the part where everything comes together because this bill isn't just a tax policy update, it is a structural shift in how the United States relates to Bitcoin, capital markets, and the entire credit system. Point one is federal integration. If the bill passes, the United States government becomes an active participant in the Bitcoin economy, which instantly reduces friction for corporations because nothing cleanses fear faster than federal adoption. Point two is strategic competition. The bill is not happening in a vacuum. It is a signal to the world that the United States is preparing for strategic competition around Bitcoin reserves. If America starts accumulating, other nations, they just have to respond. No government wants to be the one that let the United States front run them on the only finite asset in global finance. And once the government opens the door to Bitcoin in fiscal operations, it becomes easier to just justify more legislation for the industry as a whole. Bills supporting Bitcoin treasuries, bills supporting clearer accounting, bills supporting corporate custody. This is the beginning of the institutional corridor that did not exist before. The fact that the politicians are even talking about it is mind-blowing. And point four, it's just the ultimate collateral. This is the big one. Bitcoin already acts as the most secure collateral on Earth. This bill strengthens that position inside US credit markets. The macro case becomes harder to ignore. Your entire thesis around Bitcoin as institutional collateral gets a major proof point stamped by Congress. And look at the closing line, a watershed moment, not because of marketing, because this is the first real federal recognition of Bitcoin as a strategic national asset. It validates the entire Bitcoin treasury model. It opens new frontiers to corporate and institutional adoption. So this is not some small step forward. This is the point in history where the United States quietly admits it cannot afford to ignore Bitcoin anymore, and the companies who understood this early are about to benefit from it. This is massive news. Go back a year ago, everybody. Could you imagine that this is what we would be talking about? Actual legislation about using Bitcoin to pay taxes? The people in power are admitting that we were right all along, and it is glorious. And if you want to position right before this whole thing happens and do it the right way, Swan Private is for you. Swan Private works with high net worth families, individuals, and companies building generational Bitcoin positions securely, strategically, and with real macro insight. Because the goal isn't to trade the next spike, it is to own the foundation before the rotation finishes. Visit swan.com/no-second-best to learn more. Like this video, subscribe to the channel because us here at Swan, we bring the daily Bitcoin insights with more energy than anybody. This is the most exciting time to be alive in this capital markets transformation. The world is being recapitalized on Bitcoin, and we want you here with us every single step of the way. Have a fantastic day. Do not party too hard. Class dismissed.